just dashing off around after her in the backyard.
Nice.
But where are you going camping?
There's just a lake 4 miles north, and I bought a pop-up camper, so I want to like do a
Pop-up camper, amazing.
Yeah, and it's like a hard-sided one because, fun fact, if you're a national parks person, half the national parks in the West like don't let you bring soft-sided campers. You have to have a hard-sided camper. So it lays down flat, and then when you pop it up as an A, then these A-frame walls pop out, and you just lock them into place.
This sounds magical.
Yeah, or air conditioning, or like you can like temperature control your space. Which I'm not that much of a wuss, but also I couldn't be tent camping right now, but I can be camper camping. So I'm gonna go be in the woods, have a fire, make skillet s'mores.
God,
it'd be a good weekend.
I'm so craving that. My wife and I were talking about getting a camper, some kind of camper van or something. I don't know, it's on the horizon.
Well, I have the research if you ever want to check. I might. And the pros and cons, because I just went to register it and pay the taxes on it and got insurance and was like, oh dear, wasn't expecting that. But it does make travel with the dogs and other things like that a lot easier. So,
does it have actual beds in it, or does it like?
Yeah, so it has like a couch that turns into a bed, and I've added a new mattress topper, and also the dinette table. I can take out the dinette table, and there's slats that go across that turns into a bed for my son.
This is amazing.
Yeah. But then there's like, if you can hook up to fresh water, you can have running water in there. There's a water heater. So you could have an outside shower. There's no bathroom in mine, but I have a Go Girl, which I recommend for ladies who camp.
That's, I'm a good croucher. Oh, other people arriving.
Oh my gosh, they're listening to
That's okay. I just opened it up. They're coming in now. Okay. But we'll start in like a minute. I think there's still some folks to arrive. So
anybody with certain genitals who needs assistance peeing in the great outdoors.
Right. I mean, this is the prelude to all poetry festivals, apparently, or the best ones.
$10 has never changed my life so radically before.
Oh my goodness. So thanks for inviting us to this.
Thanks for coming. Absolutely. You know, we have like this giant list of writers. We always like our dream writers that we always want to have, and you guys have always been on it, and we've like juggle, because we can usually get like a couple people at a time, and now that we're online we can get like 20 this semester, so we're like really open things up for us, so we're excited to have you guys.
Are you doing anything different with like the student engagement, like do you have like a literary festival bingo card that they're trying to fulfill, or like a new way to get them engaged online? Or
there is not. We don't have any bingo games. We have a really boring survey they have to take at the end, so I guess that's that's required by our college. Actually, I should probably pull that up because I forgot about that. No, but at the end we have we're gonna have a student reading at the end of the semester, so
nice.
They'll be like our closers. Like we have a writing contest here, and so the winners will be all reading from their work. So they'll be our last visiting writers. It's our students. Toss this bingo stamp back into jar. Oh man, now I feel like an obligation next time.
Instead of the survey, it should be like a Pictionary review at the end to like see what you've learned. What animal did Tracy kill in poem number 3? You can draw it the fastest.
Okay. See, I think we have about 33 folks right now. I think we had about, 50 some who were registered at the last minute. So we'll see what happens. But I just wanted to welcome everybody to the reading. This is our third installment this semester of the Celebration of Literary Arts. This is our 18th year doing this, of course, and it's, I should feel like I should thank some folks, because a question I always get is how does like a community college get a reading series like this and have it last for so long, and the staying power. And I say one thing is we have a great dean, and his name is Jim Stick, and I should thank him because he's a former English professor, and that's the person who you want to be in charge of the English department, and he advocates for the arts. And so I should thank him for, I think he was going to arrive sometime soon here. But I want to thank him and everybody here for showing up. I see a lot of familiar faces, and I see some people who haven't come to our series yet. So welcome. The last few weeks, we've had some fiction writers, novelists, and short story writers. This week, we have two poets who are joining us, Tracy Brimhall and Nomi Stone. And what we're going to do today is, for those of you who haven't attended a reading yet online, is we are going to do this introduction, and I'll probably ask these guys a few questions about their work in general and their latest books. And then they will each read to us for about 15 minutes. And then we'll close the reading with a Q&A. And so this is where you guys come in. We have an active chat, which people have discovered, which is great. This is like the fun part of Zoom readings, is that in face-to-face readings, you don't necessarily get to like just call out in the middle of a poem, you know, but here you can. And I think it's a lot of fun, actually. We've had some really interesting conversations in the chat as the readers have been reading, and it's a wonderful interactive tool. But more importantly, we have a Q&A Dropbox. So the last 15 minutes or so, we'll have a Q&A for all you guys. So go ahead and at any point during the reading, just go ahead and drop a question in that Q&A. And at the end, we'll try to get to as many as possible. So the more questions, the better. It's sometimes obviously the most engaging part, audience engaging part of the reading. All right, so but first I want to just quickly introduce and read the bios of our visiting writers today, and then we will let them talk for once. But today we have Tracy Brimhall, who is the author of 4 collections of poetry, including her recent book, Come the Slumberless to the Land of Nod, Our Lady of the Ruins, selected by Carolyn Forche for the 2011 Barnard Poets Prize, and Rookery, selected for the 2009 Crab Orchard Series in Poetry First Book Award. Her children's book, Sophia and the Boy Who Fell, was published by Seed Star Books, and her poems have appeared in The New Yorker, Poetry, New England Review, Plowshares, Orion, The Believer, The Nation, and The New Republic. Her essays have appeared in Georgia Review, The Southern Review, Prairie Schooner, and Gulf Coast. Some of her work has also been featured on the PBS NewsHour and Best American Poetry 2013-2014. She works as an associate professor and director of creative writing at Kansas State University. Joining her, we also have Nomi Stone, who is a poet and an anthropologist, and the author of 2 poetry collections, Stranger's Notebook and Kill Class, a book based on 2 years of fieldwork she conducted within war trainings in mock Middle Eastern villages erected by the US military across America. A former Fulbright scholar and winner of a Pushcart Prize, her poems appear recently in Poetry Magazine, American Poetry Review, The New Republic, Best American Poetry, Tin House, New England Review, and elsewhere. In 2018, her poem, War Poem, was turned into a film in Motion Poems Season 8, and her anthropological articles appear in Cultural Anthropology and American Ethnologist. Stone has an MFA in poetry from Warren Wilson, a PhD in anthropology from Columbia, a master's in philosophy in modern Middle Eastern studies from Oxford. Formerly a postdoctoral research fellow in anthropology at Princeton University, Stone is currently an associate professor at UT Dallas. So this leads to my first question for you guys, is thinking about all these different backgrounds that you're coming from and all these different themes that you're coming from. I was curious about how you managed to put those things into a single project. So I'm thinking about Nomi's latest book, obviously came out a couple of years ago, called Kill Class, in which she had like lots of themes about culture and war and ethnicity. And then for Tracy, you have your recent books dealing with, you know, divorce and loss and death and the birth of your son and motherhood. And so I'm curious about how you kind of reconcile all those themes into a single project, what that process is. Nomi, do you want to start us off maybe talking about that?
Sure. Yes, first, thank you. I'm so happy to be here. This is really wonderful. You know, I think that there's a wonderful poet named Sandra Lim, and she talks about the wilderness being something you can't get around the back of. And I think I'm interested in things you can't get around the back of, things that unnerve me and push me and delight me, but can't be kind of quantified or explained or kind of tamped down. And so I think I get into these sometimes decade-long obsessions. Um, and Kilkas is an example of one of these such long obsessions where I was bringing together this scholarly research that I was doing, which, by the way, I did really in service of being a poet. It was about trying to extend my seeing as a poet. But I did this research about war and violence and nation and empire, really, because America for me is a kind of itch, a thing that I can't quite assimilate and that I feel really complicated about. And so maybe it's less reconciling all these different pieces than letting them kind of jostle around together. And I think in Kilkas, I'm also working through, questions of otherness and self, but also questions of love. Yeah, I'll end there, I think, for now.
Yeah. Oh, Mark, you're on mute.
Go ahead, Tracy. Yeah.
I was just going to say that I think, the same idea of wilderness of I make a glorious mess first. Like I don't have a plan. And in the second poem, I'll address forgiveness, right? Like I don't have the plan for it. Like my art is messy because my life is messy and I follow rules that I'm interested in or things happen. I write to better understand the world and my experience. And then later for me, when putting together a book, I figure out its question. And then I'm like, oh, okay. So if this is the question, if this is the question I've kind of been circling around, the wilderness I can't get around the back of, then how does this move as a book? And then all of a sudden I start imposing order and making it feel like it fits, even though there was no master plan. Like when I started out, it's just like anything that happens in our life. Like then we make it a story with like a rising action and conclusion and like the meaning we took from that experience or whatever. When I'm like having it out with an obsession, I just finish and then I impose a sense of order on what I've done. But really, I'm just making stuff to try and understand the world and myself. And I just like always give myself permission to be messy. And then I like edit in the things that make it seem ordered. Like the oldest poems in my newest book were actually one night stand poems. So they were just poems that I thought I was just playing with, that I didn't have, like weren't part of an obsession or something that I knew was a major question. And then later I realized it actually fit some of the other stuff, but it had started way before. And it was whenever I was stuck on a poem, I would write a one night stand poem and just enjoy it rather than trying to like work it into something that felt more sure or permanent. So yeah, just make a mess and create order later. And it's whatever's just the itch. I like the idea of the itch of like, that's how pearls get formed, right? It's just like the tongue of the oyster, just doing this over and over and over again until you make something beautiful out of something that was irritating you.
Is that also how you approach on a micro level, like the poem itself, not just the collection or project, but like a poem itself? Do you kind of have like a central question that you approach when you start a poem, or is it once again kind of just like a mess and an act of discovery as you are writing the poem and think, oh, this is what my poem's about, I guess? Tracy, what do you, just kind of adding on to that idea?
I think my writing process has changed as my life changes. So now when things are just really weird, I find it's longer between poems. And so I have a lot more time to sort of gather what I think I'm about to sit down and write. Whereas like when I was a new mother, it was just like a thing, and then another thing, and then a thing, the end. That was my hour at Starbucks. So I really leaned into Rick as a new mom because I didn't have, my brain couldn't work in any other way. And so I think just as like time, energy, ability to write changes because life changes, my approach to writing also changes. And that's another thing I had to sort of let go of because I used to have a very elaborate writing ritual and that was the only way it could work for me. And I had to let go of that because life changed and I couldn't work that way anymore. Right. But I do tend to like draft and allow for the mess and then later create the sense of order. And once I know, I don't know what the poem is about all the time when I'm writing. And then later when I figure out like, oh, I want to say that, then I sort of craft the revision around that deeper saying that maybe it was revealing to me when I was writing. but yeah, I guess mess
Yeah.
is the main message of today.
No, that's good. So Nomi, I was really intrigued by your comment. I think maybe I'm saying it wrong. Like extending your view as a poet. That's what you were interested in when you were going into these different areas. And I'm kind of curious if you can kind of like expand on that a little bit. Like, what do you mean? What was your goal by kind of going to these different cultures or different areas of America? What did you mean by like kind of extending your view as a poet?
Yeah, I think I just wanted to see and see deeply, and I think something the way that anthropology gives my poems a gift is that maybe for me the governing conceptual structure in anthropology is what I would call estrangement and de-estrangement. So it's taking the things you think you know and estranging them. And it's taking the things that seem alien to you and finding contact points. And so that's almost the kind of structure of inquiry that kind of governs this discipline. And it helps me push my poems. So I guess in the space of Kill Class, I started out in part as a scholar of the Middle East. I lived in North Africa and the Middle East a bunch in my 20s and 30s. And I really wanted to write about the Iraq War that began in 2003 through 11. And it was one of my obsessions. And I had begun interviewing Iraqis in Jordan, actually, Iraqis who had worked with the US military or contractors in some capacity. And I was interested in how they saw themselves within these bigger structures of power. Do they see themselves as mediators or collaborators? How are they seen? And then as I followed these people's story, some of them were coming to the US and they were working in pre-deployment training camps, which were these very uncanny, surreal spaces where you have around the US on military land, you have fake mosques, fake markets, and you have Middle Eastern role players who are dressing up and acting out these sorts of roles of insurgent and mayor and all of these sorts of things. And I felt these to be sites of American empire and rehearsals of violence. And I just, it was sort of following this trail of kind of the worlds and lives of a population that was moving diasporically, but also, not within their own terms exactly, and doing work that was really quite complex, where they were having to perform something, and they were being asked to kind of be Iraqi in a certain way, but on the military's terms, right? And so I think in a project like that, I was pushing myself to think about borders and nation and violence and things like that. But right now I'm thinking about like how to estrange the suburbs, which is where I grew up. So the tools just like kind of keep on giving, because I'm not writing about war right now, actually at all. And so, whatever the topic might be, I think it offers me something.
Right on. That's interesting. So it feels like maybe this is too polarizing, I guess, but like it feels like Tracy kind of like, here's the mess and I'm trying to find the question. But it sounds like an anthropologist, you kind of you come in with a little bit of a question in your mind already as you're kind of exploring answers.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to predetermine it. And with poems, for sure, I don't want a governing question. I guess I'll return to the word itch again, an itch to get at something that unmoors me. And yes, as an anthropologist who was doing a PhD, I had to like come up with a set of questions around empire, and like I did that for my degree, but mostly I too wanted to inhabit a mess.
Yeah, you can't help it, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, you guys are prepared to read for us, I believe. Tracy, would you like to go first and give us about, I don't know, 15 minutes would be perfect.
Cool, I can do that.
Awesome.
So I'm going to start with a love poem. I always love starting readings this way because I write sad poems a lot, and this one isn't sad, I don't think. But part of what I've always wanted to write a love poem, and it took me until 4 books in to write one. And I think part of what is so hard is, people can be afraid of being sincere. Everyone's like, okay, we have enough pop songs on that subject. Like, who cares? but it was this quote by Oscar Wilde that said, "Without exaggeration, there can be no love." That sort of was like, yeah, like everybody knows that love is a little ridiculous, and you know that person's blue eyes aren't the bluest blue that ever blew to blue, but that's how you see them, and that's just the love goggle, and everybody, you know, that's part of the pleasure. So leaning into the tone of something like super hyperbolic, like just let me really explore the love poem in a way, because I just couldn't approach it before. The other thing that's fun or interesting to know, in the center of the poem is the Egyptian story of Isis and Osiris. Osiris's brother chopped them all up, and Osiris's wife and sister, it's fine, they're gods. Isis went around collecting the bits of his body. Everybody does something different with what's the one piece that she, you know, had to breathe life into later. But often, yes, we have a comment that knows that it's a phallus joke in the center of the poem. So if you like poems with penis jokes, maybe you'll like this one. This is Love Poem Without a Drop of Hyperbole. I love you like ladybugs love windowsills. Love you like sperm whales love squid. There's no depth I wouldn't follow you through. I love you like the pawns in chess love aristocratic horses. I'll throw myself in front of a bishop or a queen for you, even a sentient castle. My love is crazy like that. I like that sweet little hothouse mouth you have. I like to kiss you with tongue, with gusto, with socks still on. I love you like a vulture loves the careless deer at the roadside. I want to get all up in you. I love you like Isis loved Osiris, but her devotion came up a few inches short. I'll train my breath and learn to read sonar until I retrieve every lost blood vessel of you. I swear this love is ungodly, not an ounce of suffering in it. Like salmon with its upstream itch, I'll dodge grizzlies for you. Like hawks to skyscraper rooftops, I'll keep coming back, maddened, a little hopeless, embarrassingly in love. And that's why I'm on the couch kissing pictures on my phone instead of calling you in from the kitchen, where you are undoubtedly making dinner too spicy, but when you hold the spoon to my lips and ask if it's ready, I'll say it is, always, but never, there is never enough.
Mm.
This book, so Nod, biblically, is where Cain was exiled after murdering Abel. He was sent out to live in the land of Nod, but I also knew this poem growing up about Wink and Blinken and Nod. And they were three brothers in sleep who rode the seas of the sky and caught the herrings of stars. And so it was somehow both this like land of lullaby and dream, and also this like place of exile and murder. So when I was pregnant with my son, my friend's murder trial was going on. And so the place sort of merged for me in a single place. And the book contains both murder ballads and lullabies. So I thought I would read one of each. The murder ballads are actually essays, but I do have a couple of poems about murder. So I'm going to read Lullaby on Mount Moriah. And for anybody who's not a biblical scholar out there, Mount Moriah is where Abraham took his son Isaac to sacrifice him to God. So that's useful to know in the poem. Abraham and Isaac are in there. So that's why it's the lullaby on Mount Moriah. The lullaby I wrote on your throat about the stained hilt of the knife in my hand begins, whisper, or snow will come and make its sadness famous in your mouth. The why of you, a radiant devilfish. The what of you, a fat little soul bluing at the edges. The surest way to receive a free ram is to tie your son's hands behind his back. Offer me a metaphor, God said. Abraham stretched Isaac out on a rock. Like this? Don't be impatient with the gift. It will bleed out in the time it takes shadows and atoms to inch their way between stars. Every fire thinks it's a part of God, but lightning is not a promise. A flag is not a shield. Love wants you to believe that there's a God somewhere who can do your dying for you. There are raptures that won't come for you and raptures that will. In between, satellites blink the news to the lights in our hands. Love will teach you many things, most of them tragic. Like last kisses and letters under your windshield wipers, like helplessness, like the man on the news weeping and carrying what remains of his son in a plastic bag. And Abraham said, "This is how much I love you," and measured Isaac from ankle to scalp. Love will gut you and then ask you to carry on singing with light on your tongue, as a father finds flies crowning his son's dreamless head, lambent as the hand of God, ushering a late ram from the bushes. So I'll also say too that I found it really difficult to write poems about my friend's murder. I found the essay very accessible, and I think some of that, I mentioned with love poems, once I was like, I'll just be wacky, the love poem was kind of easy to just rushed out of me once I found a tone that could kind of work for me. And with poems, I found it really hard to write a poem about murder, whereas the essay gave me some sort of tonal distance or a way to approach it. So I think sometimes there's this famous quote by Adrienne Rich, and I believe she was speaking about received forms in poetry, like sonnets, villanelles, sestinas, where she said form was like the asbestos glove that let me pick up what I couldn't touch barehanded. And I think even thinking about genre as a form of form, right, as a way that lets us approach something, most of the things called murder ballads in the book are the essays, but I did write a couple of poems because I know an essay would belong. So this is called How to Sugar for the Atlas. The atlas is the atlas moth. And last year I was one of many mothers who were raising butterflies in home to teach my kid about chrysalis and stuff like that. But another thing that one could do, whether one is a mom who wants to teach their kid about cool insects or not, is you can sugar for moths. So there are actual instructions in this how-to, but you could also look it up online if you wanted to have some nocturnal visitors. And who doesn't like that? So this is How to Sugar for the Atlas. Begin first with the intent to lure a bright species, the Luna with its lichen glow, or the cloudless sulfur with its daffodil flutter. Ask the moon for the garnet symmetry of the Atlas, with its wing powder like ash or the wrong snow. Create the temptation, brown sugar, stale beer, molasses, blackened bananas. Ratios aren't important, but apply to bark with a paintbrush while singing murder ballads until your trees reek with sweetness. Coat them at dusk and wait for dark. Watch for souls returning with furred faces and nocturnal hungers approaching from Arctic latitudes. Yes, call his name when the first one arrives. Don't be surprised he doesn't recognize you. Watch him dip his proboscis with tender amnesia in the bait. Don't be surprised when you need to keep him, this creature with spiracles that claims not to know you. Bag and freeze him. Give him a gentle second death. Slow his panic to dull flaps. Help him relax enough for saving. This is another immortality, you can say, as you pin and label him with careful ink. This is the kind of cruel others will understand. You want him whole again, not like his first death when police found him and thought he was moving, how he looked dressed for the night before flies rose from his body, holding the shape of him midair, a shadow with 1,000 wings, and then a prayer. I read that once and a lovely person was like, that's not actually the best way to preserve moths. It's like, it's cool. I know that because I did, it's one of those things of like, you write the poem and you're discovering your thing. And then I did all this research on insect preservation, but I picked the preservation method that would best speak to this idea of loss, of trying to save someone's body that's gone and kind of thing. But I did all of my research on moth preservation when I wrote the poem. I think it's one of the beautiful things about poetry is that so many of the cool facts I know about the world are because I wrote poems and I was fact checking myself. Because I think poems are about intimacy and I think facts are a form of intimacy. And I really like that poems and being a poet is less about the thing I'm making and more about how I stay alive and how I like keep engaging with the world and stay awake. And so for me, I love fact checking myself. I love looking that stuff up and be like, what? That's how you do it? So you start just by making, but some of that like imposing order later is just understanding what it is that you're speaking about with more clarity. So this is my last poem. It's called Contender. And the fun thing to know, if you haven't seen the insurance commercial about Secretariat, the racehorse, is that Secretariat was a racehorse that won the Triple Crown. I've never seen a racehorse in my life, but I still thought this was cool. That the secret of Secretariat's success was a genetically enlarged heart. And so that is why Secretariat was able to just be extraordinary. And the quote at the very end of the poem is really what the veterinarian doing the necropsy said when they held Secretariat's genetically enlarged heart. So this is Contender. It's all right to overdress for the riot. Your rage is stunning. It's all right to pursue the wrong pleasures and the right suffering. Here's my permission. Take it. It's all right to replace a siren with a bell. Your emergency should make its music. It's all right that the meter reader broke your sunflower in half. You knew better than to plant it where you did. Sometimes it's all right if you call your waiter honey when you order sweet tea. It's all right if you fall out of love with being alive, but rise again tomorrow with French pop songs and fresh croissants. Wear all your gold to church and try, really try, to believe anything but a stethoscope can hear your heart's urgency. It's all right that your mother died. So will your father and your son, but hopefully not before you. It's all right to lay naked in the rain and refuse to go inside, even when the moon tries to make your cold thighs shine. It's okay to lick the ice cream cake from your fingers. Do it now, in front of everyone. And if what falls on the children lining up their cars for the soapbox derby is not snow but ash, that's all right. Celebrate the mutable body. And if you write notes to friends and senators in primary colors, that's fine. It's even okay to begrudge the stubborn pears in the wooden bowl. You're right, you know. They're waiting to yellow until you turn away. It's all right that in the economy of forgiveness, you keep coming up one daffodil short. It's all right if you ask your heart to grow the size of Secretariat's, not because you want to outrun other horses or because your legs are classic, but because you too want to be buried whole after someone examines the insensible engine you left behind. I am of the beloved's name no longer metronoming the valves, and places that slick fist in a stainless tray for weighing and shouts, "Sweet Jesus," before describing its ungodly heft with superlatives. Your heart, the most tireless, wildest, wiliest, thirstiest heat on record. Thanks everyone for coming out, and Nomi, I look forward to hearing you read your poems.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I really appreciate that. Yeah, Nobi, can you give us some of your work?
Yes, thank you, Tracy. That was so wonderful. Okay, well, I will likewise start with a love poem because one really must. And this is a love poem to my wife. It's a love poem to swimming. It's a little bit of a love poem to my hypochondria, but we'll get there. Then I'll read a couple from Kill Class, and then I'll read some newer stuff. Okay, this is called "When You Swim, Make Your Whole Body Like a Lung," says my wife on our honeymoon. And I don't think you really need to know anything, but my wife's name is Rose, so she will appear. Mostly the brain and heart are water, and the lungs, which I try to remember when I follow Rose into the sea, not heeding the ambulances in me as we skim above urchins, their million arms. At dinner later, over spaghetti carbonara and tiny silver sardines also soaked in oil, we talk about how there are some people who are both afraid and uncurious and never leave their home. Others are very curious about the world, but sometimes afraid. I think but don't say, we are equal parts curious, but me more afraid. My stroke is sloppy, so she teaches me how to frog my legs and arrow my arms. And every day I swim a little farther above the spines. I like it. The bad worm in my stomach tells me to leave, and I endure it longer till it passes. I have been so afraid of my body, measuring everything wrong or weak. The mononucleosis that lasted a year, a long cough later deemed postnasal drip, and the mistake of my lung skin folding on the x-ray, miming a spot. I wept I died again in my mind. Oh, Rosie, I want to be brave, and I can. Last year, you were pissing on my leg after a jellyfish stung it when a wasp zoomed in. You gave me a look to say, Nomi, relax. And instead, I flailed your wee into your face. This year, I let the wasps pass, haloed with a green gold fear. Then they pass. They pass. I'm not sure about the acoustics of this, but there are all these sirens. Can you hear them? I did not conjure them just because I have metaphorical sirens of my anxiety in the poem. I don't know what's happening. Sorry, I hope it's okay. I'm going to read poems about war that also sirens might fit. Okay, so here's a little kill class. This is called The Anthropologist. I bring my waterproof notebook, Arabic phrase book, bug spray, a terror of snakes. I drive the wrong way, and the car is spat onto sanitary field road or onto the road for Normandy or littler massacres. Or for the meat you eat after, do I take it with vinegar or sweet? Separate the shoulder from the rib, spit me onto Pork Chop Hill, Ham Road, Chicken Lane, Devil Way, and into the hold of these woods. So, what do you study? Is this part of a class for you? Jeeps grow and grow under the pines. It's true, they take me for barbecue after. Ask me, am I comfortable? Do I want dessert? And what do I think I know about them? And do I know any Americans who went to war, or don't I? And if I don't, who do I think I am? And do I agree that through my stomach, they will get my heart? That is a poem that emerged in part because when I was doing this research, I was being often taken out for barbecue. I was in the South, but also I had noticed that a lot of the streets around the military bases I was visiting happened to be named after meat, which had a really dire undertone to it for me. Okay. I'm going to read a poem called Motel 6 After the War Game. And I had mentioned that in these games, there are Middle Eastern role players in them who are acting out various roles. And so there are some names in here, but these are pseudonyms. Motel 6 After the War Game. The field glows off and on like fluorescent screens of televisions in faraway apartments. After the games, I fold into the smoky flowered coverlet of the motel, floating across the long black river of the highway. Today, Omar ran in the woods alongside the training boys. Yusuf compared it to camping. Henna gossiped about Laith. Laith pretended to die. Ahmed cracked open sardines to share in the grass, their spines melting immediately to nothing. Omar pretended to be a bad guy. Nafisa, who they all agreed at the Arby's afterwards has a very bad story, fell inside the game. Inside the flowered coverlet, before the day blinks black, I hold the dream of a you in my center. I stop the motel bed from going under. I keep the world above water until I sleep. So that one also turned out to be a bit of a love poem. I'm just gonna, I'll read just, maybe I'll read just two more. Okay, this one, my wife and I go mushrooming a lot. She's from Scotland and from an island where there are just really luscious, fantastic mushrooms that are growing. So this poem is called "We're Only Picking This One Kind of Mushroom, but We Know What It Is." What a summer. Our basket isn't big enough. We look near the roots, considering each neck proof that after a good rain, the sleeping fructify, moon pale threads tessellating together under the soil. My mother and father have stayed together. They love each other and usually are good, each to the other. And my mother's mother and father both loved the other. And when young, they rode horses together. And my father's father harmed my father's mother. But my father is so astonishingly kind to my mother and to his son and daughters. He taught me how to give whoever it is I love the bigger half, to hold the thread together. After rain, you can count on new mushrooms, lit fruit in the moss. I'm not afraid of anything. Okay, I am. But sweetie, look, all these tiny trumpets. I will read one more. Do you guys want a poem about the former Dixie Chicks or a poem with limpets and P.F. Chang's in it? The first person to type in the chat gets to choose. I can't decide. And it's the island of Mull. Okay, P.F. Chang's it is. This is called from my wife. I guess I've written a lot of poems about her lately, who is writing a collection of stories called Homescar. Rocks are notched with sea limpets, and the pockets limpets leave once they've sealed into the rock and know themselves most inside it, shell swelling, softening the stone. You can sketch their home scar with your thumb, the X the body can't stop returning to, little mollusk driven by the seas, then sealing again to the same known. My glorious wife and I joke about home, grooves in the rock we land in again and again. I am from the soothing of P.F. Chang's, the shoe stars in the mall, the lit waves of others exchanging money for calm. Before that, my people are from fear. My great-grandfather left, hidden in a wagon of straw. He crossed the ocean early, just before he couldn't. I am from fear. I steer clear of harm if I can, wear an extra sweater, and don't let my ankles buckle. Oh, beloved, I will try to be bold. The body longs backward and forward, backward and forward. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, both of you guys. That's excellent. I was looking through the Q&A, and there was some interesting questions here that I think kind of correspond to what I was thinking when I was listening to these poems too. Although we do have a question in the chat about which island you are referring to in Scotland, Nomi.
It is on the west coast of Scotland in the inner Hebrides, so closer in, not the outer Hebrides. It's called Mull, the Isle of Mull, M-U-L-L. It's really wonderful.
Very cool. This is actually a question about, well, there's questions that seem to be kind of similar, so maybe we can combine some of these. One is from Kyle McCord, which I think you guys know, and he says, hi friends. He says, somewhat self-serving question here with so many voices engaging, discussing the last 4 years, particularly the insurrection, quarantine. How do you write about this time in a novel way? And this part of your thinking, or perhaps you're asking yourselves different questions. And then the next question is related. What's the social responsibility of a poet in thinking about pandemic, climate change, immigration justice? So we're thinking like pretty big ideas. How do you kind of, Nomi, you obviously as an anthropologist are kind of thinking about political issues. And I'm curious about how both of you guys kind of merge the personal with the political, and when are things maybe too close to talk about yet? Like maybe you're not ready to talk about the pandemic, or I don't know, what's your philosophy on how to handle those large topics? Nomi, why don't you go ahead and start?
Okay. I think about this a lot. I think like on the one hand, it's sort of this how to live with an ethics of attention, of close seeing, of witnessing. And of course, you're in the current, you're in the stream of the thing yourself. So you're inside it. But I think I just try to pay really close attention. And I don't know if I can, I don't know if I think I will write about it in a novel way insofar as everyone has a novel embodiment of the world. And I will offer mine. And I'm not sure I can say more than that about novelty, but I do think I will do a lot of listening and asking questions. I'm a really curious person, and I know that I only have my body and my experience, and I want to know what it's like for everyone. And so that's just kind of my personality in some sense. I want to know what it feels like to every day work in a grocery store right now in Texas when the mask mandate was just relinquished, which is honestly anguishes me. I want to know what it feels like that maybe it can't be enforced and people still have to go to the grocery store every day. I want to know what it feels like to get the vaccine after you've lost someone you love. I won't have had every single experience, but I will have mine and I will listen. And I think that's kind of the ethics of attention, the best I can offer.
Oh, wow. That's great. I love the ethics of attention. Tracy, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, and I too, I love the ethics of attention. And I do think sometimes we need something to triangulate or something to distance, because like the last poem I read, Contender, is actually my Ferguson poem, but like it never mentioned Ferguson or Missouri. I mean, like, or, you know, it's not like I'm naming somebody explicitly, because also there's the issue of like, what do I get to say? There's the paying attention to others, but not taking other stories, or, you know, so on the one hand, it started off about like, it's okay to overdress for the riot, right? Like, or it's okay to do these things. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to like struggle to keep facing the same issues and, you know, feel like there's no progress. And then of course, other bits of my life ended up showing up and the poem went somewhere else. So I agree that like, I don't worry about being novel, I guess. I love it when I read the work that I'm just like, how did that person even come up with that? But I'm sure maybe someone out there thinks that of me, I don't know. But like, I only have like one voice and the approach that works for me. And in terms of like how our political job or ethical job as poets, on the one hand, I feel like most poets probably vote the same way. I can't say that for sure. I have not done the survey, but I'm going to guess that they tend to vote for a certain party. So I don't feel like you necessarily are doing the work of changing someone's mind, but if so much of it is about the ethics of attention, then you're letting people make sure they're not alone. You're making sure that they know that you're paying attention to, that you see the world this way too, that you're working hard to, and that I think it's just the comfort if they aren't alone. And with subject matter too, I think I felt this way 4 years ago. I was like, there's too many struggles. The planet is dying and there are kids in cages, and like, what the hell are we doing? What do we do? And like, you know, attacks on reproductive rights and things like that. And what do you do? And my friend was like, you pick a struggle. Let each person pick a struggle, and then there will be enough people, you know, in mass. But you can't take on every struggle of like every issue in the world, right? Because how do you write the poem that's like the environmental poem that's also about racial justice, that's also about disability and access? And I mean, maybe you could, and somebody has that gift, right? But otherwise you pick a struggle and you really fight for that struggle. And maybe you address that struggle in the poem too. But you don't have to do it all, but you do your part. And you let others know that they're not alone.
I like what you're saying. In my poetry class, we'll have students who want to like write about race, and so they try to write about everything about race, and that's a lot for one poem to handle. And I love what you're saying about like, just pick one struggle or one part of the struggle and try to like make it your own, and kind of help you focus. I was also just kind of this is a follow-up, I guess, is thinking about, you guys are talking about the ethics of attention, and it's kind of like the ethics of witnessing and getting other people's stories, listening. I'm curious about how you negotiate this idea of like taking other people's stories and making art out of it, and where do you find the balance on? I know sometimes I'll have students who want to write about a tragedy that happened to them, but they don't want to expose anybody, and so they kind of just talk around the tragedy, and they don't really get into the the nitty gritty. And so we have these conversations about like, what is the ethic? And I was curious about how you approach that. So for instance, Tracy, you talked about your friend's murder trial, and you probably had to like negotiate some, boundaries there. And same with Nomi, looking at other cultures. Tracy, why don't you start us off? How do you think about witnessing and where the boundary is?
Well, in some of that too, so that is, versus some of the like more political or bigger things, you are still a witness to that, but without maybe a direct personal connection. And I tend to like not address that as directly, in part, again, because I don't need it to be like, here are my thoughts and feelings on this. And not to say that people's thoughts and feelings aren't important about major national events, but it's just not a thing I ever, foreground myself in with a poem, because I don't want to like take up space. I don't think maybe that's the thing I want to speak to as directly. So I tend not to speak to somebody else's story to that extent. If somebody's story rubs up against mine, our lives share this thing. In this case, I lost this person. And then, of course, I feel like I have some sense to write about it, but I also had to ask those questions of like, how much am I able to reveal? What do I say about this person? What can I say about, how would his family feel? How would these other people in his life feel? And thinking about like, what are the ethics of approaching that? And I don't have clean answers, but I always do try and think about what my intent is. Like, what is my intent in writing this? And is anybody hurt by this? And and then the third one isn't a question, it's just a guiding principle for any poem that I write, is do I love the person reading this poem? And I think that is part of my attempt. If I love the person reading it, it means I can say shocking things, I can go dark places, but that I care about returning that person to themselves in the end. It's the same way I would deal with sharing trauma with somebody, is just checking in, making sure they're okay, they're willing and able to hear that stuff, and that I'm not just like trauma vomiting on somebody, that I'm just like, we're gonna deal with some dark stuff, but then it's safe, and I'm gonna make sure we're both okay at the end of this conversation, kind of thing. So I try not to be like, and then this person, and then this trauma, and I'm trying not to have my pain cause pain for someone else. So I try and be really like, that's just one of my guiding principles, is that I love the person who's listening to me, and that I'm careful with how I reveal things and what I share. So I do think I get to some pretty dark places. I handle some pretty intense stuff in a poem, but I'm trying to make sure I'm careful with that information. I'm trying to make sure I'm not hurting the reader or anybody that the poem might be about. That doesn't mean that I get to guarantee that I never misstep. That doesn't mean I've never possibly triggered somebody, or that somebody was upset by something I said or wanted to fight with me about something I said. But all you can do is go into it with that care and concern, I think, and re-examine yourself later too, to make sure you know your intent, and then, hope it does its good work in the world.
Right. Nomi, what about you? I was also just thinking about you're like in proximity to the subject that you're sometimes observing. And so I'm like wondering how you even negotiate that very proximate kind of like relationship.
Yeah, I love what Tracy said about the not causing of harm as the governing principle as a whole. And as someone who does fieldwork as an anthropologist, I write about structures and institutions rather than, as much as I can, rather than into people's stories. Insofar as, we are moving through giant forces, politics and economics, and we are buoyed about. And to understand how we are buoyed about is the goal here. How are people made into technologies of a bigger politics or of empire, right? Rather than saying, I'm going to tell your story, I'm going to take your story. No, I want to tell a story about America, actually, is what I want to tell. And I did read one poem that had some names in it. And I want to say that those are all characters I've invented, because it didn't resonate with me to take people's direct names or experiences. They're sort of composite witnessings, nothing identifiable. And I think also, like Tracy, the question is, how is one in conversation? What are the contact points between the self and the other. I've been writing a few poems that have been triggered by conversations I've had with a friend who's a marine biologist. But they're conversations that we're having where like, I'm this person and he's that person and we're interfacing, right? And he's telling me about various phenomena and I'm asking questions, and he knows that what I'm doing is writing poems. And before I send anything out for publication, I ask him to read. And so that's part of the ethics of not doing harm and taking care with people's lives.
Excellent. Actually, this like connects to another question in our Q&A, thinking about having a reader read first before you send it out. This one asks, how do you process different forms of feedback, whether positive or negative? How do you implement that into your writing? So I guess we're thinking on process and the revision process and the feedback workshop process. How do you guys engage with that? Nomi, do you want to start us off maybe? Since
Yeah, sure. I think I have kind of like a handful of close poet friends who I send drafts to. We switches, we do trades. And some of them, I have one, we've been doing it for 20 years. Yeah, I've got two that I've been doing it for 20 years. And so we're enmeshed with each other's voices and poems and the changes that have occurred. And also to some degree, because we're friends, each other's lives, right? The material that often winds its way into the poems. And so I think that when I receive feedback from this kind of precious set of people, I send it to a few people. And I think that I often, after I finish a draft of a poem, I put it in a drawer if I have the strength for like a month. And then I look at it again, and then I maybe send it, and then I see if I have any revisions. What do I agree with? What is my instinct? What did I want to preserve in the poem? What was the heart of it? And I think that the longer I've been writing, the more I am able both to listen and trust my instincts. So I know when I know, and I also want to receive from people who I have these relationships with, especially in those raw early drafts, right?
Right. Tracy, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think like I'm still getting feedback on poems. It's not like I have like evolved as a writer to a place where now that I'm on book 5, no one needs to see anything anymore. I think in a classroom setting where people are strangers and they're also maybe in that learning process where they're learning how to give feedback too, I always tell my students that I heard Carl Phillips, the poet Carl Phillips, say it, but I think it comes from somewhere else, that every poem must contain a line of wilderness. So often when you write something weird and inexplicable comes out of you, and that's the best feeling. Mm-hmm. Robert Frost said, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. And that's often the thing that we fight about most in class is like, cut that thing, keep that thing. You cannot make everybody happy in a classroom, right? Like, so these are like 15 well-intentioned people who are all trying to help you in your poem, but you will make the poem a pretty corpse if you take everybody's prescription, right? You cannot take everybody's advice because sometimes they don't agree with each other. So it's recognizing too that people are offering you the best advice that they can, but also sometimes it's based on their aesthetics. There was somebody in grad school who was always like, cut these articles. Why do you have all these silly syllables? And I was like, because sometimes it's the cat, okay? Just not cat. Oh my God. But there are people who sort of have these bents, or like they really don't like figurative language, or they really don't like, and that's their aesthetic sort of preferences coming out. So you can't make everybody happy. But like, I think too, sometimes I was also really in love with feedback. I really wanted people to be mean to me when I was younger, growing out of that. But like, I really felt like it's because they were taking me seriously and pushing me. But every time I took like really stern advice, it almost never worked for me. It was usually some sort of balance between where they saw that I could go and what I felt my voice is, or what I wanted my poem to do. So I think take it in, keep these things, because sometimes that advice ends up working in the third poem after that one. You're like, oh my God, this reminds me of like, yes, I should try this with form. So I think it's still really interesting to have all of those cool pieces of advice, but less than getting a set of prescriptions, and you shouldn't mix all those meds anyway. I think it's more interesting to think of it as tarot card readings. If everyone's looking at your images of past, present, and future and trying to guess where it could go from there. But it's not like it's not like you have to do this. You still have your free will. It's like based on what we're seeing, we can kind of see this in the future of this poem. So I think, yeah, you take it in, you give it time, and you sort of like decide what's best for you in the poem, and you don't have to make everybody happy. You were your first and best reader.
That's great. Let's see, one last question, and actually there's two that are like really related. One is, what are some of your inspirations for your poems? And I think it connects with our last question, which is, why poems? In other words, what was your main thought of using poems for a form? So one is thinking about why this genre, and you write in other genres, and what does inspire you when you, what are your inspirations for poetry? Tracy, you want to start us off?
Sure. I think my inspirations have evolved, of course. I think at first it was survival. It was all of the stuff that that like a backed up sense of like needing to speak. I was a very quiet kid. Apparently I would wake up and I wouldn't even cry out in my crib. I'd just wait to be found. And I think all of a sudden when I hit my 20s, I was like, excuse me, I have thoughts and feelings and now I must share them. So I feel like at first it was just urgency is why poems. Urgency itself, my past itself was the inspiration of poems, just trying to speak something itself was reason enough and reason alone. And now I think it's how, I've mentioned this before, I think it's my spiritual practice. It's how I stay alive. It's how I stay alert and pay attention to what I'm experiencing in the world. And I think inspirations, I want to say like, I love facts. So often I hear a fact, I'm like, I'm writing this down. It's going to end up in a poem. This is too cool. And I want to share something about the world. And sometimes I use my like tawdry personal life to try and get people interested in facts about clouds or something. And I'm just like, here, you can be voyeuristic about my sad breakup, but can I tell you about clouds too? And that's kind of the exchange I'm willing to make. But I also love vocabulary, just words themselves. I'm just like, oh, this word deserves to be in a poem. And I just want to play with it. So yeah, it's both utterly playful and very spiritual at the same time for me. And spiritually, I guess in that sense of like quietly honing myself and constantly endeavoring to be the best version of myself I can, which doesn't mean I need to be the hero of my poems or only show my best side. But part of that like emotional work of being human.
Wow, that's wonderful. Nomi, would you like to add on to that?
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think there's an ache in me. And I think it is an ache of language and an ache that I'm not sure how to categorize, which some sort of longing for the world. And I think that these things meet. And I think the obsession with language, when I was a little kid, I carried around a magnetic refrigerator letter, a green W everywhere. So who knows, the alphabet was something since the time I was a toddler. And I was, my parents tell stories of how I was, when I was tiny, I was yammering on about translucent curtains and purple hexagons. I mean, things I had heard somewhere, but like the mouthfeel, the pleasure, right? And so when I get language in my ear and it meets with an ache in the world or in my life, like that's where maybe a poem happens, or I feel a poem coming. But like Tracy, it's my spiritual practice too. It's my way of being alive to everything. And I guess what are my inspirations? Let's say everything. I think that my first two books are pivot around these anthropological projects, but I'm now, there was someone in the chat who asked about the kind of anthropology as a field and its mechanisms of classification. And I've always worked to find something else in anthropology to stretch it. But I think also having a field site, which is kind of a box in the world, is something I feel less obsessed with right now. Instead, maybe the world is a field that we move through in some sense, and there are zones of inquiry that don't need to be tethered to a single project. So I'm just moving and asking questions, and in my garden and with my dog and expecting a baby, and lots of things at once are inspiration for poems.
That's awesome. thank you guys so much for your thoughts and your reading and your words. And I know that everybody really appreciates it. And I just want to thank you again for being here with us today. I really, I thank you for that.
Thanks for lovely.
Before we leave, we have for the audience a couple things that we need you to do. Is one, we have a really exciting survey that is totally voluntary, but it takes like 30 seconds to fill out. But we're just give us your thoughts, your feedback. But we also have in the chat, the last link is our schedule for the next few weeks for the future readers. We have 7 or 8 more readings on the horizon. So click on that, register early, and hopefully you can join us, if not next week, soon. All right. So once again, I want to thank you guys for being with us today and taking the time out to read your work for us. All right.
Thanks for having me.
Guys. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Awesome.